else used different technologies. I used the Lalima system, and so it had its ups and downs. But for the discussion questions, I would create each week about 6 questions or so, and students were asked to respond to at least 3. And then they had to respond to at least 2 other students' posts. So this way I could highlight the key concepts from the text, but then also give them an option of how they wanted to approach the material. And this was also an ethics-focused course, so I would include one sort of ethics-focused question in each set that they needed to respond to each week. And I tried to give them choices of the focused questions too. And then in addition to that, I created the blog entry assignments. And so students posted 2 blog entries a week, and then also responded to about 2 other students' posts each week. And one of the things that I liked about the blog entries was that it enabled the students to take the concepts from the text, but then use it in another creative context. So for instance, one of the students had attended a symposium on demilitarization activism in Hawaii, and then so she shared about that on her blog entry post, or often there were feminist organizations and so forth that students could go to through the blog entries and use that space as a way to sort of talk about the material beyond the assigned readings. Also, I used the blog entries as an icebreaker at the beginning of the semester. So, post something about yourself for your first blog entry. Why are you here? Why are you going to take the class? What I tried to do with the discussion questions is to include, different sort of mixes of text. So, audios for speeches by different authors, or film clips from YouTube that, for instance, a lot of the readings we had engaged politics of cinema. So, one essay was on Bollywood cinema. So it's amazing how you can find so many different Bollywood films on YouTube. So, not all of the students might want to do a film analysis, but I would give them the choice. Here's the film. You could watch all of it if you like, and then use a key concept from the reading to sort of engage that film. My favorite piece of the audio or film was I assigned an essay by Arundhati Roy one week, Walking with the Comrades, and then there was an interview with Arundhati Roy in Democracy Now! So I assigned that interview with her to sort of work with the essay, and then they had to respond to those different texts. Let me see, some of the aspects that were problematic with the discussion questions. Well, I had 17 students in the class, and so there was a lot of, I tried to respond to everybody's responses. So I would do it individually or collectively, so I spent a lot of time with the responses. I'd perhaps, include another assignment maybe next time, such as a reflection essay or some sort of final group project instead, and maybe bring the discussion questions down to 2 a week. Another thing that I found really, something with the Lalima discussion questions, I don't know if anybody else knows how to do it, but it was difficult to order them. So they would just become all scrambled, and it was very confusing, especially towards the end of the semester.
Were you using the message board?
No, I was using the discussion links one, so.
Okay, because Lalima does have a blog option, which stays more organized.
Okay, yeah, that's where we use it, the blog entries, and we use those things for the discussion questions too.
Because you can comment on the blog post, so maybe that might be a way to keep it organized. Because I've had a problem with some of the other Lalima tools as well.
Okay.
Like how you're supposed to track who's on, who said something, how to, the organization is a problem.
The organization. Let me see. And I guess the other one was just timeliness, like responding quickly to everybody's questions. That was an important thing that I found. Providing examples in the syllabus of what I expected from the assignments, and then responding right away to the students' posts, especially with so many students. becomes unmanageable, I guess, if you're not on top of things. So I found that the discussion questions and the blog entries, the thing that I liked about it was it helped to create an online presence in the class. So there was always every day some sort of activity taking place. There's always just a discussion happening. But yeah, that's one of my biggest things.
Should we just keep going down the line and then
Then maybe
and see what
Yeah.
themes kind of pop up? Because there were some things that you talked about that were really resonating for me as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I taught political science, Southeast Asian politics, 307B. I ended up having only 7 students, even though it was a writing intensive course. So I was kind of interested about these focus courses, whether they're O or, it's hard to do O, but if you do ethics or something like that, it would get more students. But it ended up enrolling 9 and then 2 dropped out. Well, 1 or 2 dropped out. I only had 7, so that made the grading somewhat easier. I'll just talk quickly about what I ended up doing. I actually worked from Blogger, and it was a big learning curve for me. I had trouble initially because I hadn't used Blogger that much before. But just to give you a sense of what I did, this is sort of my week 1, and we start at the bottom because it goes backwards. But, it's this first post, welcome to the class. Posted up a little intro, and then everyone then posted, like you were saying, Brianne, everyone posted kind of an introduction of themselves, right? And I used this. Everyone had to access this every single day to see where the assignments were. The other thing that I did is I actually embedded lectures on. So what I did is I used a software that is called Camtasia. And what it does is it screencasts. So you can record your PowerPoint lectures. And then what I did is I recorded the PowerPoint lectures, I uploaded them up to YouTube, and then from YouTube I linked to here. But it's nice because Blogger and YouTube are both owned by Google, so their interface is really quite convenient.
What was the name of the software, sorry?
The software I use is called Camtasia Studio.
Camp?
But I think Apple, on their computers, you can do it natively within the software. At least.
I feel like I think you can do it in GarageBand.
I don't, it may not even be GarageBand, it may,
There's
Jairus will know.
Okay.
But just to give you an example, this is I think this is my first lecture.
Windows 7B, Politics of Southeast Asia. We'll be starting our...
So it's a little boring, but it's kind of, it's a 15-minute lecture. I didn't go into the opening themes, credits, and all that kind of thing. Google only allows you 15 minutes initially until you become an upstanding member of the community, then you can upload more. That's why I had to split it up into 52 files. But what I did after this is that I required everyone to comment on the lecture, so that and so they don't do it initially because I kind of changed. I asked them later on. But if you look at lectures later, then so lecture 17, identity and conflict in Thailand, right? So there's 13 comments here. So I give them a due date. And they all comment, and I try to reply. So these are the kinds of comments that they're making based on the lecture. And some of them were really, really nice sorts of comments. Sometimes they start responding to each other, not as much as I thought they might, but in a lot of instances they do. So I really like that aspect of it. And then, so one of the things I did, I posted up my PowerPoint lectures, and those end up going on La Lima, so they're not just kind of floating around. So you can just access those. Right. And then syllabus also accessed on La Lima. Readings accessed also on La Lima. They were in the module section. So all the readings, week 1, week 2, week 3, you could just sort of click and open up. Well, this is giving me, this is me editing this, so this is what they see, and then it opens it up. You can open it up. Here, so this is how I ended up distributing the readings. The only other things are that I think were interesting and kind of a learning experience. Everything that I graded was on, everything they submitted in terms of writing assignments was on Google Docs. And so what I did essentially was, let's see, deal with this. I don't even remember what my,
So you set up an individual Google Doc account for
Yes.
this class?
yeah, correct.
Or Google
I
account
don't even
for the
remember what
class?
my password is.
Did you also have them use the same Google account for the blog? Like, is
Yeah.
everyone, okay, because that's a problem I've had in the past using Blogger with the class, is that the hawaii.edu email addresses don't really work well with Blogger because we incorporate with Google. So it gets kind of, like, they have to use a non-Hawaii email address.
Yeah, that was a little bit confusing. But for example, so on the assignments, what I would do essentially is have them submit an assignment on Google Docs and we would share it. And then I would read it, and then I would sort of comment on it with just red, so good introductory paragraph, blah, 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 right, yes, that was big. And then I would give a rubric, right? And so I would say, weekly reaction paper, this is kind of how your rubric is, and I'd give a score at the end, I think, yeah. The only other thing I used was something called Gradebook, and this is what Brienne was talking about, giving feedback like right away. So Gradebook was really good because you just put in their grades and they know immediately that they have each week what their reaction paper score is. So then if they've missed one, they start to get freaked out and they start to, so I think giving constant feedback is actually really important in the context of online teaching, because otherwise people just sort of disappear and then come back a few weeks later and say sorry. I mean, that happens regularly too, but I think it's more prone to happen
So you both assumed that over the course of the semester, they would be logging in every day, and you would be also sort of checking in with them every day. It wasn't sort of, here's what you have to do, and by the end of the semester, blah, blah, blah.
Mine was more week by week, like week 1 on Monday, I gave the entire schedule of assignments. Most things were due on Wednesday, and then I had a few assignments due Friday.
Okay.
And then, so it wasn't like every day they had to check, but they did have to check every Monday. And then they uploaded stuff.
And you posted all your lectures up before the class, so you have those, or you post them up before each week,
I posted them after.
after?
The lectures I posted up. The recordings I posted up on that Monday, but the PowerPoints I posted
After.
Yeah.
I did kind of similar, I did the module assignments, so I had, the weekly assignments up at the very beginning of the week, all the expectations, the key concepts. And then I sort of used the discussion questions as like my mini lecture format, so there's some questions that would be like, 3 or 4 pages long, but then there'd be questions at the end, so, so they had it, every week.
So just a few quick things. Pros, very flexible, both for the professor and the student. I could be in Japan, I could be in Indonesia, wherever I was, in a coffee shop, and you could do this. And I think in theory we're bringing in new students, although we need to be careful we don't cannibalize our offline students, but that should be a pro. The cons are obviously that there's not as much interaction with the students, so you have a little less sense of what's going on with them. It's a different structure to the learning, so there's not as much like discussion questions and all that kind of thing. Or not discussion questions, but kind of, interactive questions. And so it's easy for students to kind of get lost and disappear. And the questions that I have are, one, does this scale, right? So can we increase the number of students? Is it really any less work? I don't think, to me it wasn't really much less work. It's kind of like prepping a first-time course. The second time you teach is a little bit easier. But the third question was, is it equivalent? Is an online class equivalent to an offline class? And I would have to say here that at least this class, it was probably 80% or so of the content, but it was not 100% of the content of my regular 307B class. So that's something to think about. So that's all.
Great. I'm pretty sure after my little presentation, and you've all gone around, I'll be barred from ever teaching online again.
Even though you've been doing it for years. Right.
I was said to be the first civilian in Hawaii to experience online communication when I was part of something called ICE, Electronic Information Exchange System, set up by Murray Churoff with a federal grant from New Jersey in the early 1970s. Tell you interesting tales about that, since I received information from around the world before anybody here knew anything about it. So finally, I was a futurist. I knew things that no one else did. Otherwise, it was pretty hard with things floating over on boats to be a futurist. I've taught courses via radio, television, PSAT, satellite communication, even newspaper. I've won national prizes for all of that. I was one of the first faculty members to require my face-to-face class students to be online as soon as UH made that possible. And a lot of what you described is what I do in my face-to-face classes. And I'm always looking for new things, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of ideas from that. However, I've been teaching Political Science 171, Introduction to Futures, online via Outreach College since fall 1998. Every term, year-round, summer too. It's not on Laulima. It's on some 1990s vintage computer somewhere. Only Ken McChan knows for sure. I can give you the URL if you want to take a look at it. You can see the outline of the course by going there, but you need an ID and a password to enter the modules and read the material. I teach it as an overload extra course without compensation, so it earns some money for the department. Not much, but a little bit. The course was once cutting edge. The structure is based on a pedagogical model developed as a doctoral dissertation in education by John Blumhart here at UHM, and it still meets all the current requirements for learning outcome crap that we have to do. The content is continuously updated, but the format remains exactly as it was in 1998, entirely word-based, not a single picture. It was designed to have a chat room feature, but that was abandoned in part because most online students are online because they can't be somewhere at a specific time, and in part because the course gets students from all around the world. So it's entirely based on students reading material and sending me their email responses to questions posed in the module. I immediately respond in some detail to them one by one, usually several times per module, and there is no class interaction beyond that. And Debbie, to answer your response, I'm pretty much on it all the time, as I am anyway. So the response to the students is immediate. Here's some lesson learned. Each medium has its own grammar, its own logic. What works in a live class won't work on television or radio or newspaper or online. You need to rethink your entire way of teaching for each new medium you use. If you do online what you do in your classroom, it probably won't work. Point two, online teaching is much more personalized and, in my experience, much more labor intensive than face-to-face classes. My students got a lot more personal attention online than they do in a class. Anyone who thinks teaching online courses is easy in a way of avoiding hard work has either never tried it or hasn't done it very well. Three, hardly anyone fails my face-to-face classes. About half the class fails or drops out of my online classes simply because they don't meet deadlines. I originally didn't have any deadlines, but soon learned that without them, students would send me everything on the last day of class, with no chance for feedback or real learning. I now have a very detailed syllabus with caveats about lateness mentioned over and over, but still many students can't meet deadlines. Almost all of those who do wait until the last nanosecond before sending in the material, even though they often have a week to do each module. A tiny fraction complete all assignments quickly and well. In fact, this semester, since the online courses only began this week, one student's already finished the entire course before the semester began. So it's supposed to be flexible like that, but most people, in my experience, do not use it. There's a kind of a bell-shaped curve of grades for those who do manage to complete all modules. Some do brilliantly in every way. They contribute all sorts of ideas, they bring in stuff from outside, they obviously get it. Some do okay and some do very poorly, which may be more a test of their reading abilities than anything else. There's a lot of reading and writing involved, and it's not a WI class. A major problem about online classes, in my opinion, at UH is lack of support staff. Outreach College does what it can, but that's not much. After the course was first launched, there's never been a person available to me to help improve the form and content. I've been entirely on my own. All new technology requires a huge learning curve, and I seldom have time to do it over and over and over as each new technology emerges and fades away. I would love to be using social media, for example, but I simply don't have time to do that along with everything else. I've been on countless media policy committees at UH over the years, and lack of support has been a constant complaint over the years. We've been encouraged by the administration to use the newest media, but given no tech support at all. Getting Harry Partika, guys, was some years ago was a huge step forward here in this building, but it came only after computers were absolutely essential, many years past the time we needed the help, and there's nothing like Harry Guys for online courses that I know of. To me, that's the most important thing that's needed now. I recall not too long ago one faculty member on one of the media policy committees stating that his goal for getting media into the classroom was to have chalk and an eraser and windows that open and close. And that's still just a dream for most of us. So that's my experience.
I hate chalk. I
Huh?
hate chalk.
Well, good.
Take it away. You wanna? Do you guys have any?
I haven't talked.
Fair? It's
Well,
fine.
you
Oh.
know, I don't know why, kind of have, but not really.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I was like, I took a bite, not knowing what that was. Okay, so I taught Introduction to Anthropology 110, Political Science. So I just came from PCC, so I'm like still in my anthropology mode. I had 6 students, which is just the cutoff to meet the requirements, so they didn't subtract pay from me, even though we have to do the same amount of work, basically. So that was good. What surprised me about the sort of demographic composition of my students was that many of them were coming back to do a second BA, or they decided that they wanted to pick up a BA in political science, and they wanted to just go at it full force once the semester started. And so they wanted to use the summer to prepare themselves. For many people, this was like a second major. Some of them were seniors. None of my students were sort of freshmen, had never taken a college course, sort of straight out of high school. I was more expecting that out of the 110 class, because I thought that that was more the kind of students that were there. So I was pleasantly surprised and found that, you know, I could throw a lot of information at them and they could really absorb it pretty efficiently because of that. Like Brianne, I used Laulima, much to my frustration at times. But I mean, it worked, especially if you know how to use Laulima really well, and I learned how to do that as a TA. I had to really get deep into Laulima and use the gradebook functions and the discussion, you know, blog kind of things. So I used a lot of those functions. But it can be quite maddening if you don't, you know that, for instance, you have to use that special button to copy things from Word into the blog, whatever it is, it's gonna get scrambled, and you have to do it over again, and it takes forever to load. And there's all these like little details that you have to do, because Laulima is just, it's a kind of program, it's just way too content heavy, and it doesn't process information very efficiently. So I think that, you know, next time, if I teach online again, I would definitely use a blog or something that would be easier to upload content and stuff like that. But Laulima worked. One of my greatest challenges was that I was in Thailand while I was teaching, which
made it really difficult to have some kind of like online live chat situation because of the time difference, like 17-hour time difference. So, and that also created like a time lag in how quickly I could respond to my students. So that was a little bit challenging, but it did make me much more aware of how I need to structure the course next time around, especially in regards to media content. So the way that I taught the course was that I wanted to have a lot of video and a lot of sort of supplementary YouTube videos and stuff like that, and links that they can go to as a supplement to the course. And I kind of had to change that around a little bit during the summer because I had a student who was based in Hong Kong and was in and out of China. And so all of the YouTube videos links that I sent to him, he didn't have access to. And so I was, I didn't know quite how to get around that. And so in the beginning, I had watch this episode of the Colbert Report and talk about it in terms of, this concept that we're learning in class. And I had to change that around. And so we had, in addition to having questions, sort of the same kind of discussion questions online in La Lima, I had weekly reaction papers. So they had to find some kind of political event that was happening in their local community or globally that they could relate to the content that we were learning in class. And in the beginning of the course, like I said, I had sort of I wanted to have them watch specific things or do specific things, but I had to open that up so that they could choose whatever they wanted so that they could, get access to stuff, because YouTube videos, Hulu, that sort of stuff didn't work in China or in Thailand. So that actually worked out pretty well, and I used the assignments section on La Lima. And there you can make assignments. You can make weekly assignments. You can make 17 different assignments, and you put the due date, and so it's all very clear, and they can upload their document right there, and then you can give them feedback there, and then it corresponds with the grade book immediately. So right away when you comment and give them feedback and a grade, it shows up in their grade book, and they get an email, and they kind of feel like they're having, I guess, more of there's a feedback relationship there. So that was sort of the main thing. I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of stuff already. But yeah, the thing that I really had hoped and I had thought would happen before I was offered the opportunity to teach online was some kind of workshop or some kind of guidance as to how the heck do you do that, right? So before I taught the online course, I'd only taught one course at KCC in anthropology, never taught political science before. So it took an extraordinary amount of time for me to prepare, lectures and that I sent them sort of, I think the way you did, where I had a written statement and then discussion questions. It just took a very long time, and I didn't have very much time to prepare myself for what was to come. And the intro course, it's 10 weeks, so it's quite long as well. It's not so it's difficult to kind of figure out how to parse it out, because it was almost it was 3/4 of a semester sort of thing. So. Yeah, so I think that if I have an opportunity to do it again, I would definitely use a different online platform. And the sort of takeaway or the advice that I would give to someone else that were teaching the course is to be really aware of what kind of online content that you require your students to access, because people can be anywhere in the world, and YouTube and these kinds of things are not always available. So a way to get around that is kind of like what you did, is to have, optional media content or optional videos, or people can use news stories or YouTubes or films that they themselves are interested in, and then they can relate it to the content in the course.
Is YouTube banned in China? Or was it just Colbert?
Severely limited.
Yeah, I think, well, Colbert and The Daily Show is banned, or it's restricted outside of the US because of,
Oh, I see.
that sort
Our
of,
side.
yeah. But the particular video that I wanted them to see was a speech by Angela Davis through like Democracy Now. So that one was apparently like because the
Probably the
person
whole
couldn't access
Democracy
it.
Now account was probably.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So.
Not communist enough.
And also the film The Corporation was banned, or could not be accessed via Hulu, or even it's on YouTube in like sections, but they couldn't even access that. So I had to basically that student wasn't able to fill that assignment, which was really unfortunate. So that's something to keep in mind.
Hulu is also US locked. It's locked, like you have to be in the US to use Hulu.
Right.
So unless you want to
yeah.
get them all on proxy, that could be. I mean, then I wouldn't mess with China.
All
proxy.
Google products will be locked up in China, right?
No, they're still functional. They go through Hong Kong, but they're heavily censored and.
I was just
And
thinking,
watched.
if you tried to use a different platform, like you wanted to use Blogspot, I think Blogspot would be mostly inaccessible from many countries.
Yeah.
Whereas Lolima may not be. So that's
From
something to
many
consider.
countries, not just China?
Yeah, because depending on the particular agreement they have with Google or the degree to which blogs are regulated, and the way the content's regulated. Even some blog spots aren't available in Canada, for instance,
Wait, is that opening a blog spot or what if it's just reading the blog?
just reading it. So for instance, there's a lot of video content in Canada that is copyrighted differently, or is considered objectionable material differently, and so they'll just shut down the whole blog, depending on where its origin is. So just something to think about when we're talking about these format questions. If we want anyone anywhere in the world to be able to access it, we have to think a lot about the neutrality, accessibility of the format we're using. Whereas like if it's just written content, very easy to have it on a server where it's accessible anywhere, even if it's slow, but with some of these other issues, it's a lot stickier.
What did you want?
Well, I called a meeting in May about this, and we didn't do anything about this. So I shared Tanya's concern. I think we're wasting a lot of time. We need to have a serious meeting with all the faculty, and you guys should decide what kind of pedagogy you want to have. And it would be easier probably to set up, without the freedom of everyone to choose different tools, but to have a framework, a very strong framework in which the course online would be developed, and having instructor just using that. It would be faster, easier, and avoiding a lot of problems. I'm teaching now, and this is what, third week. It's working well. The time I had was the time I had, so I put as much as time I could to prepare this. I would love to put more time. I didn't have it, so the thing I did at the end, without going to details, because there are the usual details, I did things as simple as possible, with the assignment the same day, very clearly what they want they need to do, exactly everything, like really elementary students, and it's working. I outline for each module, open short survey, open like short test, open questions to avoid plagiarism, like some sort of short reflection, 5 for each class I did. I'm using for both online and in-class teaching. I use a different tool. It's called Lefora. It's a forum, and it's very simple. It's fast. You can upload everything there, from YouTube to your recording to maps, anything. It's working very well. It has the statistics, and it's clear, and it's working well for both classes actually. We need to talk about the pedagogy, because many students, I'm sure, they are returning to college, they're working, they have a different background. There are important things we need to discuss. It's not, obviously, like Jim said, it's not like teaching in class. It's not going to be the same. It's completely different. My idea at the end, my aspiration, I contacted this professor, Professor Payne for music department. She's trying to help me during the summer. I did 3-4 workshops while I was in Europe with the people web workshop, synchronous workshop at the same time. So it was kind of crazy, 2 o'clock at night. I was like, what? And with IT people here. They were useful, but not so useful. They're technical people. I mean, I didn't need a lot of information about Laulima. I could figure out by myself more or less. They were boring. No, honestly, they were too much into details. This different and this and that. I mean, I don't think that's the point at the end of the story for teaching online. So the idea would be to have a better online courses than in-class courses for me to do the best we can. It's a different pedagogy, in my opinion, than in-class pedagogy. Not only about the tools, it's the way we want to teach. And maybe it would be nice to structure the class different. You faculty decide what kind of theory in general, and then for the tools, we can play around with that. So as far as now is working, mine is working pretty well. I'll tell in a few weeks. Yeah.
What was the name of the program you're using? You said
Lefora.
L-E?
Lefora. It's one, the blog is great as well.
It's free.
It's very simple, much easier, and functioning much better than Laulima. You can, as much as a blog, I can deal with old course through that basically.
Yeah.
It's been very useful for on the in class and the vis-a-vis class. I'm noticing. Yeah, that's another thing. Sorry, I'm thinking that there would be an hybrid course. I'm trying to play with that. Teaching international law and the honors course, especially with the honors, and playing with a hybrid. I'm trying to use technology with a vis-a-vis relationship with the students is working much better than only face-to-face relationship, in my opinion. They found, you know why? I mean, because they're students that feel comfortable in class, and you see they explode, and online they go forever, writing, posting things, they're enthusiastic, and I love it. In class, like, aside. What else? Oh, I was interested. I talked to this Professor Payne. She's a consultant. She's been consulting professor here, helping them. We get paid for that. Right? We talked about virtual life, Second Life. I talked to them about that. That would be great, actually. A friend of mine, she teaches. She's not here, but teaches for UH Music course. Stellan Brienne. She developed a completely virtual classroom, which students they stand up, they get book for a bookshelf, move around. It took a lot of time, hours and hours, but it's possible nowadays.
Like, you'd only spend that time if either it was like you're saying, it was like a department level type of effort where we built like a political science classroom and different people could use it.
Yeah.
Or if you did it for yourself, you'd have to be guaranteed that you were going to get to be paid to teach that class
Yeah.
for like at least a
7,000.
year, 2 years, something. Like, the Second Life is not fast.
No, but I mean, what I'm talking about, for example, we should talk about synchronous or asynchronous class, at least that it's a completely different class, different approach.
Well, because, I was thinking about that, because Tony was also saying that was a problem, right, because of the time difference and all that. But when I was thinking about my course, I thought doing something synchronous kind of defeats the purpose of the online, because it's supposed to be flexible, and especially if you have a lot of students, it's just impossible to get them all together in one place, even for like 30 minutes, right, or even an hour. And so I decided not to go that route. But I do know that there's more like interactive chat rooms, where they can like vote for comments and they can be voted up and voted down. So it's not synchronous, it's still kind of, timely in some sort of way. But that was just, that was where, the synchronous aspect I thought was just, I wasn't even gonna try that.
It depends what you want to do. If you want to capture more students, so to capture those that are not at the same time, they're working busy, yeah, I agree with you, asynchronous. But if you want to look forward in the future and trying to develop a different idea of education, synchronous, it's just, yeah, it's worth exploring, I guess.
Yeah.
That's everyone who taught. So it's just a free-for-all now.
I think it's worth considering that asynchronous classes, as they're currently structured, tend to only benefit one kind of learner, which is to say they're almost all text, writing, and reading based. And something we always figure out in the classroom when we see people face to face is some people are extraordinarily bright but perform very poorly when only given written assignments and reading assignments, and they tend to stay poor at it if they don't have other ways to interact in the course. And so one of my concerns is if it starts filling the function of, say, all the introductory courses are online because we don't really want to teach them and they're big and we lose a lot of students who don't necessarily perform well in that environment, which I have found over now 3 semesters to be a lot of students who are coming to the University of Hawaii, they're coming back, haven't been in school for a long time, or who maybe didn't have the best high school education coming in, who that I think will either be alienated by the online course or won't perform very well in it. So I think I think this pedagogy discussion is actually really important because the online model does tend to, I think, be biased towards the kind of banking education that's easier to measure, right? I gave you some knowledge. Can you give it back to me in a way that I can evaluate? Great. You got an A, B, or C. I don't know. So I'd be curious to hear what people are trying to do to disrupt that. Because the one online course I taught, I found brought the worst out of me as a teacher. Because it was like frustrating and exhausting, and it's much easier to just be like, fine, just take a test, right? Like all the things that I would criticize someone doing in the classroom, I found myself doing because it was much easier to do format-wise. So I'm curious how to prevent that.
That's true. Let me emphasize again the thing that I mentioned in passing is the technology is changing so quickly that you spend a lot of time mastering the technology, but it'll be obsolete, and then you have to spend all that time over again. That's the thing that's defeated me, so that I keep this totally obsolete, completely clunky format, updating the content simply because I don't have time to learn it all over again, knowing now that I'm going to have to learn it all over again in a couple of years. So that's why I think support, to me, is the key. Someone whose job it is to constantly bring the new technology and to help you transfer your material from one to another. And it really is different. Even every different type of electronic communication technology requires rethinking what's important and the sequence in which you order things, and to what extent you're providing expert knowledge and they're discussing whatever they want to discuss, the balance. All those things have to be rethought with every new piece of technology. And without some sort of tech support, that becomes impossible, in my experience.
Also, I found Lolima, I talked to the guys, and while I was taking these web meetings during the night, and there was a chat room, we were chatting, I'm seeing the professor, the teachers, they were all over the place, from mathematics, from biology, from music, and everybody was there trying to understand Lolima. And I was thinking, maybe it's not the right way to go, to have the same tool for any kind of knowledge. Maybe we should design our own tool and use that, which is the best for social science or whatever. Because that's another problem I found in Lolima. There are too many options, too many little differences, nuances between a survey, quiz, and a test. Maybe it's just me, but why? Because there are people in teaching mathematics, they need something else than we need in terms of knowledge, in terms of response of the students. And obviously, it shouldn't even be the task of the teacher to create this. To learn how to use it, sure, but it's an awful amount of time
One of the things I did notice that was sort of interesting is I'm teaching a smaller 10-person class now, and we can have one of these dynamics where like 3 or 4 people dominate the discussion, and 5 or 6 people don't say anything. So you have to really sort of pull people out and do all these kinds of things. And it was interesting that on the online course, just because of the way it was structured, everyone got their 3 or 4 paragraphs of say every single week. And some were of higher quality than others, but there were ways in which it changed the kind of dynamics of participation in a way that was different from what I typically experience in a class, and especially in a bigger class. Then you sometimes get 1 or 2 people or 3 or 4 people that are asking the questions or those kinds of things. But the other thing that strikes me is one of the things I thought about is maybe, you know, assigning a kind of project that would be, you know, they could propose a kind of project, like that's not just like a final essay, right? So it could be like a video or a documentary or one of these things that's really amenable to these online things. I didn't end up doing that this time, partly because I had so few students, partly just, you know, again, it was one of these things where it's going to be easier, but I could see a way in which something like that could be, could help increase the kind of creative kinds of learning processes that you wouldn't necessarily have in an online context. You might have that in an online context, or in the offline context too. But the other thing I thought about is kind of like collaboration, like group projects. You know, a lot of times if you do group projects in offline classes, they're just online collaborations anyway, right? Because they're like emailing each other and then getting together 5 minutes before class and then they present the project or something like that. But it strikes me that a lot of work nowadays is online collaboration, and so that's another kind of thing where you could increase skills and also increase creative kinds of you know, learning opportunities by doing collaborative projects in some kind of way. But again, you know,
Another thing I found useful was and the students told me this, was to always use an avatar for them, for you, for yourself, and kind of break the ice. Because the online teaching is not the physical presence, or at least it's a simple thing that just came to my mind now.
Well, one of the reasons that it's important to sort of have this feedback is we don't have to teach these classes, right? They're done through the outreach program at this point, so yours is actually outreach. In part because they have a different mission from what we do, so that gives us an opportunity to talk to or have students that aren't traditional all the time. But we don't have to teach these classes, so part of the question, and one of the reasons I wanted to see what was happening in the classes is it worth continuing to try to pursue an online kind of teaching process, knowing you have to talk about technology and methodologies and pedagogies and all the rest, or should we just kind of say, nah, it's not really for us?
I think it's essential. I think we have to, especially for our graduate students. They've got to have some experience themselves online. Because clearly, whatever the direction is, as long as electricity is flowing, that's
a big
way
add.
for me.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee the electricity will flow, but as long as it is, it's going to be more and more online stuff.
Well,
It's just, again, there's no support here at UH. Whereas I'd like to know what the situation at Stanford and MIT and these other places that offer everything online or available, how they do that. And have anybody looked at those courses? How good are they? Are they just talking heads, or are they
It's a huge
sophisticated?
variance. Like, it's a huge variance. So especially when they first started, a lot of it was just making the lectures available electronically. So either a video of the lecture or kind of like an audio over PowerPoint, like you have your lectures. That's kind of what it was originally. You get them through iTunes University thing. But now they're making them more interactive. So they're actual courses where you actually turn in work. And so you have the kind of talking head lecture part, but you also have interactive work that you're turning in and getting feedback on.
Or interactive, maybe overstating it. None of them have human graders.
Right.
So both the Stanford and MIT program use bots to do all the grading. So all the
You have
TAs,
10,000 students. in
yeah, all the TAs are AI. They can even answer questions. They're actually, the MIT AI is pretty impressive, maybe more responsive than some TAs, at least when I was TAs. And you always get a response immediately.
Maybe we need one for our department.
Yeah.
So they can do essays.
Yeah. Well, so they're all math and engineering courses.
Oh.
And so the responses tend to be very easy for the semantic reader.
Like problem
they're-
sets.
Yeah, so even when there is text to read, the text that's read is very technical, and so the semantic barrier is very low
Okay.
for the semantic reader. My understanding is they have semantic readers now that are actually grading for not just content, but also things like style, on how readable it is. And in fact, that's how they're grading the SAT. The essays now are all semantic readers for bots. So they're getting more sophisticated, but I think it's worth pointing out the way that they're getting more sophisticated is by lowering the necessity of us, which is to
That's
say,
the future.
well, I don't disagree, but it is sort of worth thinking about that.
We replace ourselves.
Right, that we are participating in the replacement of ourselves, or a particular pedagogy is, right?
Yeah.
So the only reason they can replace people is because they have a pedagogy model that is very much a banking model of education. We have a data set that you can master, and if you understand the data, you can do things with it. And the sort of things that we think of as qualitative attributes of a teacher are irrelevant. You either can do the math or you can't. You can do the engineering problem or you can't. And so it's a very binomial world, which I think online classes have a tendency to push towards because it's easier to do it in the format, but seems to be going away from how most of us want to teach, create pedagogical environments. Like, do we really want people to be able to, like, I don't know, recite Maslow's hierarchy and tell us the 3 major points of Hobbes, or do we want them to be able to think about things? So that's my concern, is to what degree modeling the quote-unquote successful online programs also models a really pretty terrible retrograde pedagogy.
Well, what would be a good model to look at? I mean, if we've all had problems and encountered clunky systems, is there one out there that anyone's seen that's like, yeah, this was a fantastic online experience class? Not that I've ever had one.
I see all the ones I checked out, I've been like, oh god, that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like the program that Toronto, Georgia Tech, and a bunch of the other big universities just signed on to looks exactly like this model. Boil your class down to the easiest sort of signal to noise ratio possible, and we'll make it work.
That's where outcomes-based learning comes in,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and it's interesting to think, so I went to Georgia Tech in my undergrad school, and even when I was there, they already had some online learning, and I imagine the difficulties they've been encountering with trying to do it ad hoc is why they're switching to this really basic type of model, because the way it worked was most of the online classes were actually kind of hybrid classes where you had the option of either taking it face-to-face or taking it online, and all of the lectures were videoed. And like you could even see like the people in the classroom raising their hands and asking questions and that kind of thing. And then there's a lot of online content. And some of them were also broadcasted over our campus television channels. But so then you still have this kind of, you have the lectures recreated, and then you try to do the tests online, or you have to email in problem set answers, that kind of thing. And so it still feels like as much like an in-person classroom as possible, rather than taking advantage of what the platform has to offer. So it's like either you take advantage of what the platform has to offer in such an extreme way that you have bots grading everything, or you seem to just try to reproduce what's in the classroom, but then you run into the platform problems. So
I think it's also important to note that there are sort of, I guess, tremendous benefits also to having a more sort of textual interaction with your students and having them have to respond and articulate answers in writing, which is something I feel like students are moving further and further away from. They're required to do less and less of expository writing in all of their classes. There's like all of these, multiple choice, this and that in all of their courses, and you go to class, you might have to participate in some kind of discussion, but very rarely will a professor require you to write sort of and articulate, a full response to a reading or something like that. And so I think in an online course, you get a lot more of that like constant textual sort of dealing with the material that could be really beneficial for their writing in the long term. So like you said, you know, it's not, these are considered writing intensive courses, but they are very writing intensive and reading intensive. And that could be sort of an unforeseen benefit of it, even though it, you know, you could have a lot of creative writing assignments that I think could benefit the students, so.
Yeah, I agree. I found the writing aspect of, you know, the discussion questions and the post to be really productive because in that sense you're sort of, in a way I think it disrupts the sort of, you know, choice model or multiple choice testing, or at least the students have to engage the material in a creative way, or at least they have that opportunity. And I like the idea of a group project or a way to find some way for students to collaborate together, whether, you know, maybe it's writing a paper, they exchange their papers with each other, or, you know, provide, you know, having like a writing buddy or something where it enables the writing practice to be more collaborative between students. I mean, it's just a little minor thing, but it's really something that I was thinking too, that I wanted to do some sort of group project. And then another question comes to mind, well, you know, how many students do you have, and then how big are the groups? Because I did have a few students who did kind of like drop off of the board, you know, and I would email them, where are you at, you know, so I know that sometimes when you get into groups, some students just don't show up for those meetings, so.
Even if they're online.
You know, even if they're online, so, I mean, I guess, you know, that's a smaller detail, but.
Yeah, the undergrads still, if you say group project, they are gonna roll their eyes and like maybe drop your class if you tell them during the first week. They don't like group projects. And so finding a way to explain to them why and kind of be better it is online and how it teaches you important skills for kind of collaborating online, that I think would be a big part of that if you're gonna bring it in, because they are really resistant. Like I had a group project to the extent of they just had to create a blog together and then they all post individually. And I had like 3 people come up to me after class with like serious concerned faces and serious concerns, like 20 minutes of concern about just this having to like collect 5 emails and put them on a blog. Like it was serious.
My experience is the exact opposite.
Okay.
They love small group work. The only way you can get this generation of students to work is to have them work collaboratively, in my experience. But let me make 2 comments. One about writing. I love to write. I think I write well. People tell me they like reading what I write. And I explain my online courses entirely reading and writing, but only because that was all that was available at that time. I think we need to intellectually give up the idea that writing is ever going to be a central way of learning anymore. And it'll always have a role, but it isn't going to be central anymore. And one of the continuing, I love this department, but one of the continuing arguments I always have is over that issue, that writing something in a journal, it means you're a scholar, and if you don't have that, you're not. And that was the way it used to be, but I don't think, I do think that we have to really rethink our work, and that's my sort of comment to you. I agree at one level completely with what you say, but I think it also can be used as an excuse to thinking through what's really important. What we often want our students to be able to do is to orate, or to have some really fabulous writing style, but whether there's anything there or not is a really serious question. And once you try to put it in a form where there's a there that can be sort of objectively, if I can use all these horrible terms, evaluated, then I think it's often intellectual laziness on our part, that we really don't try to rethink how, what are the key concepts, the key whatever I'm trying to get across, and how can I get it across in some way other than reading and writing, to use that as an example. And I think we need to ask that question, really. And one of the ways to ask it is to try to engage with this technology and see that a lot of stuff we take for granted in a face-to-face class simply isn't going to work. We have to, as you were saying, be much more explicit, much simpler. Every little thing needs to be explained to them somehow, either by illustrations or by instructions or something like that. So it makes us be much more clear in what we are trying to get out of the class than we have to be in a face-to-face situation.
I was gonna say that, on the one hand, I would be really uncomfortable if all our 100 levels, for example, were taught online. Or if it ended up doing something like that. On the other hand, it makes me sort of wonder if we offer like 3 sections of 305 or something, and 2 are taught offline and 1 is taught online, all 3 of them are probably gonna be taught very differently depending on the instructor and all that kind of thing, but it also makes me sort of wonder, what courses should be taught? Are there certain kinds of courses that are going to work better? And is that all online one going to be radically different from the other 2 offline ones, or is it just going to be different in the same way that the other 2 offline ones are different, right? And that was kind of my feeling, was that if I had taught 307B offline versus online, that I wasn't doing as much as I had been doing offline.
And that's just because you couldn't put the content online, or it took more time to do it
I think it
this
was just
way?
more time. And I think partly because the summer course is 10 weeks.
Okay, so if you.
Right, and usually our courses, and so I think you could potentially squeeze stuff in, but then it just becomes a matter of like how much it becomes all about.
But if it's an online course during the semester,
Yeah.
and it's like a similar number of weeks.
Yeah. Right.
Because if you got 80% in like a really short term.
Yeah. 10 weeks. Yeah. But that's a good point. Yeah. If it's during the semester, it's the same number of weeks. Then the question becomes: is it something you teach on a weekly kind of thing, or is it something that you can finish before the first day of class?
Thinking that the fact they're online means they're not physically need to come in class, okay? So the advantage could be that we can use that time to develop some sort of idea of pedagogy to have them doing something else and then coming to class. Because one of the risks of online distance learning is to have students just stuck on a computer and that's the only way they learn, and they believe that we make them believe that that's the way they absorb knowledge. But we could use maybe that time because they are physically somewhere. So what about developing something they will do in the place where they are, no matter what it is, something is common to all this planet. I have the idea.
Short list.
I know.
Short list. It's a short list.
Like
It's
you
true.
can allow them to go to events
video.
and things, but even video is apparently really hard. Like unless you're emailing people files, but that can get you in trouble.
But you can have them choose what they want to do.
Yeah.
So you have a theme for the week, and then
That makes it
You
really
know,
hard on you, though.
Because
You
you have
then
to
need
try
to
to
know
watch
what,
everything.
something you don't know before that they're
Right,
learning
right, right.
about.
I went to
You
this
have
thing, it
master
has a
that.
name I've never heard of before. It was an event.
This is the acronym, but it's a really common acronym, so you're not going to be able to find the website of the organization.
Right.
So I had the
Okay.
weekly reaction papers, and it was like, a political event. You could interpret that however you want it. A political event can be a film you saw, it could be whatever, something you read, something that you witnessed. And so people were allowed to write reaction papers about anything in their sort of empirical realm of activity that they found that was, relatable to the content in the course. And that sort of freed it up for me. And if I had questions about, what is this or whatever, I would have them, explain it to me or whatever. But they would usually, and I would have like set questions in the weekly reaction paper. So, you could do something like that and leave it open in that. But you could even say like, okay, in the course of the semester, you have to go and see sort of a public event, or you have to see this many films, or read this many books, or you can say, okay, you have to do like a variety of different activities that get you off your butt and out into the real world or whatever.
It makes it more interesting for grading too. If you kind of allow them to write about different things, especially even if you're just doing like a normal end of the semester paper, and this is something I've done with my normal face-to-face classes. Like I don't give them a set of questions that they all have to write about. Like it's much more like I almost force them to write about different things so I don't go nuts when I'm grading 30 of the same paper. So like when I did comparative politics, I made them, they all had to choose their own country independently and then compare it with one of the countries we did as a case study. So every paper was totally different. And it was much more enjoyable for me. Even though, and it kind of made me like a quasi-expert in like because I had to look stuff up to see if they were just, bullshitting me. It was more work, but it was more fun.
So we should continue to offer some classes online, any ones you think specifically versus others?
Seems like the politics and media class,
That one.
that seems tailor-made
Yeah.
for an online experience, and it forces the instructor to they're already thinking about different media and how different media are used in politics, so maybe that would be a less onerous step for them to take, to think about how the different media working online can be used in the class.
And the intro level class too, I had a few students that were like, I won't be able to graduate unless I take this class right now.
Yeah, those seniors.
So it seemed,
maybe some of them
especially
are-
for the way that UH is structured, its schedule and cancellations of classes and things like that, where people aren't able to graduate on time, this seems to be one of the ways that people can fill in gaps in their curriculum, so.
Is it possible to make, well, you had an online writing intensive class, because the bottlenecks are things like 110, 335, writing intensive classes in general. So that does seem like a really good use of the resource. For those, because a lot of times the people in 110 are fifth year seniors who are like, I thought I was graduating in the spring, didn't remember I had to take 110, and they're really bitter. Usually.
If we do the 202 class, or 200 or whatever it is, for the writings, that would be, I think, that might be a good place to start. It is online. I don't know if that might help it get approved faster. I don't know.
Like incubating it or something.
Just red tapes.
One thing I did notice, I taught a 400 level class in women's studies, and I noticed that I had about 5 or 6 students who had never taken a women's studies course before, and this was their sort of, dipping their feet into the class. And so that was something that I learned, I guess, my first time. Usually if I'm teaching in class, I get a sort of idea of where everybody's at, but I didn't quite ask that at the beginning of the semester for this class. So I noticed that the higher level courses oftentimes it could be like their first introduction to the topic, so maybe that's something to consider. The 300 and 400 level classes. Not that I think that there should necessarily be a hierarchy to what you have to take to get to a particular course.
Should be something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to continue this discussion of pedagogy as well, because everyone has different pedagogies offline as well. So it's not like, I'm not sure there can be a unified pedagogy online, but I think to think about ways to go beyond and take advantage of the technology to be able to do different things, I think is really important.
Also some of the pitfalls, dangers. I think there are a lot of sort of path dependencies online because the structure of being online is, I think, sometimes, if you're not adept or want to put a lot of time into technology, less flexible in the classroom, or we're less adept at using them. So like the wolf pack of one phenomenon online, I think is something we have to be concerned about, where students don't ever learn from one another. We are the only point of contact in the education. And that's, for me, one of the best parts of the classroom is that students can learn from one another. Much harder to do online, or at the very least it has to be more artificially produced. Like it has to be an assignment where they read somebody else's paper, or required to make comments on somebody else's.
I don't think there's any doubt that the best is what you call a hybrid class, where you have heavy media stuff and also the face-to-face. To me, the students get far more out of that than one or the other.
Yeah.
And hybrid classes don't have to be like Monday in class, Wednesday out of class. They could also be first 2 weeks in class, 6 weeks out of class, and then 2 weeks. I think there's different kinds of models.
Can you actually have a technology where I know that there's Skype, where, I have heard of some people who actually talk to their students, but then I guess it's a question of access to the technology too. Maybe not everybody is able to get onto Skype, or I don't know how weird that would be, or
Time differences.
just to have different
You can have
ways
one
of
meeting
talking.
a week or every 2 weeks on whatever specific date in which online conference.
Yeah, Google Hangout's actually pretty good at this point in time.
Yeah.
You can get quite a few people in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
But again, it does depend. Like I expected when I was in Rio that I was going to be able to upload stuff to my class and be available. And while I had internet access, the ability to get like fairly large sized, data files up wasn't a reality. So if the point is to make it more accessible to more people at more times, any layer that you add that requires more bandwidth, you're having the opposite effect. So I think that balance is right? How wide you cast the net, how good it is.
Well, that was
once
the
you're
issue. That's
in.
why I ended up uploading my video files to YouTube, because it could actually stream much faster. There's a gigabyte limit in terms of how large the files can go on Lalima. So even if I were able to upload the entire lecture file, people would have to like download it and then play it. And so streaming it on either Vimeo or YouTube, I think it becomes much easier. But again, it's about who has access to YouTube.
But even on campus here, I don't know how many times I've banged my head into the desk, like I'm trying to play some video and it just freezes and stops.
Yeah.
Try doing that in Thailand.
Never
For the
stream,
entire semester.
never stream that during class. Just
Right.
rip the file from YouTube and play it
Yeah.
from a computer, because
Yeah.
like, it's much more likely that a student, even sitting in the library, will be able to stream something on YouTube than you will be able to stream something on YouTube, especially here in this building. This is crazy. And it'll work 2 minutes ago in your office and not 2 minutes later in the classroom. And maybe it's because all of your students are doing something crazy on their laptops, I don't know. But it seems consistently poor.
I think that's an important rule.
Yeah.
That's almost always the case, it seems to me. I'd like to go back to the question about 2 weeks here and 2 weeks in face-to-face and something like that. One of the things that online courses are supposed to do is to, or could do, release class from seat time. That you have to sit for a certain number of hours, no more, no less. And so the idea of allowing students to do it all in 1 week, if they want to, has some advantages and some disadvantages. I think one thing you can do with online classes that you can't do face-to-face. And so figuring out how to do it, I think, is important. In all of my teaching, I never had anyone until this year do the entire course in 2 weeks. She did an excellent job, but I don't think she ever got the essential point of the class. And I kept arguing with her about things. Oh, it's all just fantasy. You're all just making it up. It's all outrageous ideas, and which I think that's usually people don't end up with that. And I think she needed time to process it. So there is this question about what you're doing, riding your bicycle or sitting on the toilet, and all the other things that are processing what you're doing in class, and whether you should encourage students to move as quickly as possible or not. My problem's been the opposite. As I said, I had to make sure that they met deadlines before they went on to other stuff. They had to successfully complete one module before they move on to the next. And the horrible experiences of having 30 papers, 30 modules worth of papers to read on the last day of class was certainly something I had to do something about. Another is, even though I think the intention is for the classes to be extremely large, unless you have bots doing the grading, I've had to limit the size of my classes because they are so tremendously labor intensive. They require so much more attention for me to read and comment back. There's no objective testing that I do at all. It's all essays back and forth. And that is just, I can't do it for more than 10 or maybe 15.
I think that's right. That's a question of scale. Like, the part of the attraction of online teaching, I think, initially was, hey, we can really increase the number of students that we're enrolling. I'm not exactly, having done it, doesn't seem to me that that's
It's
necessarily.
definitely not less work.
What's that?
It's definitely not less work.
It's not less work.
It's more
yeah.
tedious work often.
Yeah.
Can there
That's
be
right.
co-teachers or bigger class?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's losing the advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Then
because
you're
if the
breaking your
advantage is
advantages
trying to,
by
like, you have this much money to pay for this many teaching hours, but you have 20% too many students. So how are you gonna get those 20% of extra students through, especially the bottleneck courses, and still have them actually learn something?
I mean, my interest was also creating funding opportunities for graduate students that we can't create through just cash, right? So, which really, again, only works if there's a structure in place. It's not a ton of work that's going to consume the entire life of the graduate student. Then, because if it does, then it's not funding, right? It's a worse job than they already had, right? So, I mean, it seems like having a pedagogy discussion that is a sort of baseline, having a format or framework that's relatively decided so that graduate students can just plug classes into it, and having content that they can draw on to do it is the only way to make it so that it's not giving them worse and more work than they had before, and it's actually generating some money so that it would seem like funding. Because I don't really imagine that most of the faculty want to suddenly become solely online teachers.
No, as I said, I do it as overload without
Yeah.
compensation.
Yeah.
But that's not fair for that's not fair. And
Yeah.
it's certainly not fair for
Right.
grad students.
Right. So I think, I don't know.
And something needs to be done, and this is what you were saying, about canceling courses, I guess.
No, Tanya.
So, yes, you would. But, because it is, you put a lot of work in it, and, whether you're teaching 6 or 8, you still ought to go ahead and teach it. it seems.
Yeah, I really had to market my course. I became quite concerned because I thought I wouldn't have enough people. So I went to HU Studies, I had them put it out. Ultimately, you don't want to market too much because then you're concerned that you're going to be totally limited. So there's balance.
Well, last summer we had low enrollments across the board in all classes. And so
Well, my concern was partly did we cannibalize ourselves?
I don't think that was the problem. I think we had just consistently low enrollments.
It was that way all
We
over the
canceled-
campus.
Yeah, it was everywhere on campus.
Every
We
department
a lot of-
canceled. a lot.
Other universities too.
courses.
Friends at Hopkins had their classes
Yeah.
canceled because people weren't going to be able to stick around during the summer.
So something else was going on than just,
People
about the
basically
summer.
can't afford to be in.
Right.
They cut the funding.
They don't have any
Yeah,
money.
the funding changed.
And so next summer we'll probably have fewer courses being taught. And one of the advantages of the online ones is that because, well, I guess in the summer we can fund, those are all funded out of the summer, so that's not true. During the year, we can do online courses that don't eat into our otherwise very limited number of lectureships. So, or TAs, so they become additional options for us. But yeah, summer I'm not gonna expect will be much different this year in terms of enrollments.
One thing, I mean, if we want to continue this discussion, is I do know that the School of Education, they have people that are doing research and, teaching online teaching. I know one woman that's getting her PhD looking at this, and she's also an administrator at Quinnoble. So there's all these different kinds of discussions going on, and maybe the people that study this thing for a living will have something insightful,
Yeah, we can hope that.
That's so
Or at
funny.
least someone who's already thought through a lot of the questions, so even if you disagree with their answers, you can at least have a conversation with them instead of all of us are like, well, we haven't really tried this stuff, but we looked at it and,
Because the data hasn't been good so far. That review of Phoenix Online University was
Yeah,
it's bad.
like a horror show.
Well, they're hiring here in Honolulu too for online classes, and it's like $4,000 or $5,000 to teach a class, and you just literally upload a PowerPoint presentation for the entire online class, and then you
And
get
they
your
give you
degrees.
$5,000?
Yeah.
What's the number?
Yeah.
It seems like this might be
It is very
worthy
much
of
like
worthy of a committee or assignment to maybe the curriculum committee. I don't know if they're doing other things, but
I think
it
we'd
seems
have to
like
create
it's
some
an
bots to
on.
be on the committee.
Yeah.
I know.
Time this year.
No one wants another committee, but
Well, but if,
A focused
if we have
effort,
a
maybe.
teaching committee, we have a teaching liaison, right?
We do.
So, I mean, that could be, that would be at least the interface, I would think.
Yeah, I
But-
think my point was just we shouldn't think like when we give a lectureship to someone, like a lectureship to a graduate student, and it becomes an online course, or it needs to be an online course because of enrollment, that we're just giving them the same thing as if we gave them a classroom. I mean, I think the general experience is it's a lot more work, and that we haven't really figured out what the work is.
Yeah.
And it seemed like we already had a problem we identified, which was we were sticking graduate students in physical classrooms where they had no expectations and no idea what was expected in terms of outcomes too. And so I guess my biggest concern is sort of more of a negative concern, which is not expanding it, but if it's going to happen, how are we going to make sure that it's not more burden, producing worse effects, and sort of passing the buck on the questions we already had in the classroom down to something that's kind of already more complicated.
Well, and it's funny because one of the reasons it's so difficult, and perhaps it's tied to the reason why teachers think, oh, graduate students will be better at this than us. Like, there's this idea that because we've grown up with the technology differently, that we'll like have some sort of native inspiration for how to use it really effectively. But we spend our whole lives in face-to-face classrooms. That's where our whole experience comes from. And I think part of the assumption that graduate students without any training will be ready to just jump into a classroom and teach is, well, you've been in class your whole life. You know, you just reverse it, you know, figure it out. But with the online classes, I would say very few of us have ever taken any like real intense online classes, aside from maybe like a week-long workshop or something. So there's that kind of, we don't have the experience, we can't really ask anyone for help because no one else here really has a lot of experience with it. So
Yeah.
So would a
That
workshop,
seems
if
like
we
an
did,
argument to not offer.
But who would-
That's
Or-
sort of what I'm pushing out there, is that until we
This
can
is a
figure out what's
workshop.
involved,
or,
I'm not
or,
sure we
or
should.
rather
Figure that out
train
after.
us to have the
So-
skill to teach the workshop, which might be more work, but like Jim was saying, this is a skill, I mean, I've heard Kathy say, yeah, do online teaching, that's good for your CV. You know, it's just one more thing to market, you know, against your peers, so you'll have a little up. So, I mean, I wouldn't say run away from it. There are people who are willing to teach. They're adapting. You know, it's like teaching in a classroom. You stumble around initially, but you get better and better, hopefully, with feedback. I mean, the thing that we've been talking about for years is just, you know, have some training for us. Have us meet a couple of times, like do a weekend thing. It doesn't have to take up our lifetime, but just let's organize something. We have scheduled for in May, the last brown bag is online teaching again. So we talked about this, getting folks ready to make their class for the summer that they're going to teach, you know, anticipating we're going to have those classes. So, and you know, it is a chance for people to have a job. So I'm not for running away from something that might be harder or more difficult. If people are willing to do it, I think people are still willing and want the opportunity. So I would hope that we would just talk more about how are we going to train ourselves, or get someone in here to train us, or something like that.
Yeah, I think the point is, I mean, there is gonna be a certain amount of learning by doing, but I guess the point is, if we're gonna do it, we should do it flexibly, right? And I think that's what we are doing, right?
Yeah.
We're having this session, we're having this discussion. Because otherwise, we're never gonna do it, and if that's fine, then that's fine, but part of it, you know, it's gonna go forward at some level, whether we like it or not, and to at least be able to engage these kinds of things, I think is important.
I'm curious too at the Center for Teaching Excellence, because each semester they have an online teaching seminar. I know some folks have said that it wasn't very helpful in that sense, but I'm curious as to what it is. I had classes scheduled during those trainings, so, but I mean, that's another place that's focusing particularly just on teaching, so there could be all kind of collaborative projects too, possibly.
they should at least have materials available that you can ask them for like their PowerPoint that they use. I went to one of their seminar things, I didn't find it very useful either, but the PowerPoint was useful enough. It was the person talking was worthless. But so maybe at least getting the resources, and a lot of times they link you to larger outside resources within the PowerPoint. So.
Was online teacher program.
No,
Is
it
it-
was
is it-
it was so bad.
I wanted to ask a question. Is anybody, any administrator
Yeah.
encouraging us to do this?
It's,
Or is there a movement to?
there's an awareness that it now is out there, and that means that there's gonna have to be some sort of better understanding about it. This is about all I could say right now.
Okay.
But they won't hire a support person.
Well, so far, this is all coming out of the outreach college, and the regular part of the college's discovered outreach exists now as a moneymaker, and so this is all of concern to them primarily, as near as I can tell for those reasons.
And partly is figuring out, I think, the economics of this
Yeah.
as well, because there are economic advantages working with outreach, but they may disappear depending on what the dean wants to do, right? So there's kind of those kinds of, you know,
They will.
dollar bill types of
It
things.
would appear. But I'll know more in half an hour.
Yep.
All right, I gotta eat, otherwise I.
Thank you.